So some of my viewers that might not be perhaps familiar with this, just explain why this is a big deal today.
So the way that the gender identity clinic works in London is that you can be referred from anywhere in England, and the waiting lists are very long. So if a kid says that they've got gender identity issues, a child who's a girl says that she identifies as a boy or vice versa, basically doctors will tend to park everything else that's happening with that kid and put the kid on the waiting list at GIDS, as the clinic is known in the Tavistock. And the kids that the Tavistock sees have many other problems. They have very high rates of autistic spectrum disorders, self-harm, depression, anxiety, all of these sorts of things. And those things aren't dealt with because there's this weird way that as soon as somebody says gender, they don't do anything else. So what Dr. Hilary Cass said was that this was really not serving the patients properly. And the second problem is that the Tavistock has this hugely ideological approach. It hasn't been doing good medicine. It hasn't been keeping records. It hasn't been doing proper research. It hasn't been investigating the reasons behind a child's trans identity. They've just been assuming that a child who says, I'm trans, is trans, and putting them on these very poorly researched pathways with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. So all in all, I think the Tavistock can't be rescued. I think it's such a poor and such an ideologically driven service that it's brilliant that it's being closed down. And the things that Dr. Hilary Cass says about what will replace it really give me hope that something better will be offered to these children in the future.
And Helen, what would you say to any viewers that are kind of saying, look, the number of trans people in this country is very, very small. This is a tiny issue. Why do the media keep focusing on issues like this? What would you say to them in terms of how important this all is?
I think there's two answers. And one is that, yes, it might not be very many children who end up going down the medical pathway, but this medical pathway is one that leads to sterility, to not being able to have an orgasm as an adult, and perhaps, if you're put on puberty blockers, to mental problems as well. Nobody knows the long-term impact of this particular treatment pathway because the research has been so poor. So I don't know how many children you think have to be sterilised before that's actually a serious issue. And the second thing is that because of the existence of some children or some adults as well who identify as trans, we've seen a big shift in everybody's lives. Everybody is now meant to have a gender identity, and all sorts of things that everybody uses, like single-sex services or sports that are divided between men and women or rape crisis centres, these are now meant to be based on gender identity, not actually on sex. So yes, it's a tiny number of people, but it's this kind of tail wagging the dog situation.